We're learning the first Sikha of Parshas Naso in Chelek Chav Gimel on page 42. In this week's Parsha we have the Karbanis of the Nesiim that were brought on the first day the Mishkan was built. All 12 Nesiim brought Karbanis every day, and the Torah repeats the Karbanis of each one of the Nesiim. And here we're going to discuss by Yom Hashvi, Shevet Ephraim, that brought their Karbanis on Shabbos. And the Rabbi will discuss in the Sikha 4 Midrashim that address the fact that he brought his carbon on Shabbos, and a Gemara in Mayit Cotton that addresses this as well. And in detail, the Rebbe will go through the differences and the opinion of each Medrash, how they approach this Chiddush that the carbon can be brought even on Shabbos. Very unusual how the Rebbe really goes through this step by step, every detail, and finally in the end bringing out a very powerful point about Shabbos and about the unique idea that we can see from the carbon being brought on Shabbos. The shir today is being learned Lila Nishmas, Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rab Menashe Koltman. Benegeya dem carbon anesim l'chanukas hamizbeach durch nasi from Shevet Ephraim. Regarding the carbon of the Nesiim that was brought when they inaugurated the Mishkan, the Mizbeach, through the Nasi of Shevet Ephraim, Vazayna Krav is given b'yom Shabbos. He brought his karbanis on the day of Shabbos. Steht in Medrash Rabbi, the Parsha Seino, Parsha Yud Gimel. So it says in the Medrash Rabbi in this week's Parsha, in Parsha Yud Gimel. Now when we're learning the Sikha, it's very important to pay attention to the different Medrashim here. So this is the Medrash of Parsha Yud Gimel. Shleisha Dvarim she'asu anesiim sheloi kehaygen v'kiblom hakadosh baruch hu. There are 3 things that the Nesiim did that were sort of inappropriate. It's unusual, but the Eibishter accepted it. And the Medrash there says what all 3 are, and we're going to focus here on one of them. In every place, a carbon brought by a single individual doesn't push off Shabbos. V'kan carbon yachid doiches Shabbos. Here, the carbon of Ephraim was doiches Shabbos. Halamadnu. So from this we can learn kama carbon nesiim chaviv l'fnei hakadosh baruch hu. How beloved the karbanis of the Nesiim is in front of Hashem. So usually in the Beis HaMikdash, you have the karbanis tzibur that are brought in Shabbos, the carbon tamid, the musafim that are brought in Shabbos, but otherwise the carbon yachid, you have malachas of Shabbos, shaychit and so on that can be done in Shabbos. But here, the carbon yachid of Shevet Ephraim was brought in Shabbos. Aber, weiter, you continue further in the Medrash, in Parsha Yudalit, you look then in the next Parsha of the Medrash, Parsha Yudalit, Zok the Medrash binyan zeh, the Medrash says regarding this as follows. Shalei taimar, don't say, Heich chilul es Shabbos. How did he desecrate Shabbos by bringing these karbanis on Shabbos? V'haloy in carbon yachid doich es Shabbos. A carbon of an individual does not push off Shabbos. V'zeh hikriv b'Shabbos. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the Eibishter says, Lo yal pivasa. He didn't do this with his own mouth or with his own decision. Shani amarti l'Moshe chulo. I said to Moshe Rabbeinu that the carbon should be brought on Shabbos. So here this Medrash is saying, Ani amarti, that the Eibishter said that it should be brought on Shabbos, and there's no mention of the fact that he went and made his own decision that did something that was inappropriate, and Hashem sort of then accepted it. So, and pashtus kumtais. So simply it would come out that the difference here between these 2 Medrashim, the way they address this, as leiten ersten Medrash is the akrave b'Shabbos mit chile gewen, bilti ratzui shelei kehaygen. According to the first Medrash, so in the beginning what was done was not acceptable and not appropriate. Now b'diyevet, after the fact, mitzadem was carbon nesiim chavev l'fnei hakadosh baruch hu. Since the karbanas of Nesiim is so beloved, it's kiblom hakadosh baruch hu. Hashem accepted what was done, unlike on other places that this would be considered an avera. But according to the second Medrash, is the akravis carbon b'Shabbos melachatchila given ratzi kehaygen. Bringing this carbon on Shabbos right from the beginning was positive and was the right thing to do. Valani amarti l'Moshe, because Hashem had told Moshe to bring the carbon on Shabbos. Aber kadaikes kemen euch leiten ersten Medrash nit lernen as akrovas hanasi is given Oster. However, if you just think about this, it's impossible to say that the first Medrash in Parsha Yud Gimel would be saying here that this carbon brought in Shabbos was negative, it was inappropriate, it was not allowed. V'chas v'sholim zu sagen, as a nasi wird sich führen heipach hadin. God forbid to say that a nasi of a shevet in Klal Yisrael would do something to be mechal Shabbos, the opposite of a halacha. V'oid v'ikir, and additionally, and another main point there, Moshe is given thereby. Moshe Rabbeinu was here when this is all happening. The Kayanim of Getana Vidasam, Uleviim Buduchanam. The Kayanim are the ones doing the Aveda, shechting and bringing the Karbanis. The Leviim are there on the platform singing. And can we say that all of them are here on Shabbos, bringing this carbon, being Mechal Shabbos, and nobody says anything? Esma, this is a tremendous, astounding, a wonder. This can't be. Musman Zogen. So we must say, as Eich Leiten Medrash, that even according to this Medrash that uses the expression that they brought the carbon Shaloi Kahaygen, is the Akrava B'Shabbos Melachatchila given Apiyat Tzivli. They brought the carbon on Shabbos, and before the fact it was according to the Eibishter's command. Nor while this is given a Hirah Shah, but because this was an instruction for the hour, this was something unique, it's an exception. Vasachutz dem ein einzigen Mal is es Adover Oster. Besides this one only time, this is something forbidden. The Medrash refers to it as something that's inappropriate, in other words, something that's usually unacceptable. That's what the first Medrash is emphasizing here. So if even the first Medrash agrees to this, that lichatchila, the Eibishter wanted it to be done, so now, was are die Svaris von die zwei Medrashim? So if so, what is logically the difference between the first and the second Medrash? Was leuten, the erste Medrash is the Akrave Shaloi Kahaygen. That the first Medrash is highlighting the fact that this is unusual, and it's sort of negative, even though the first Medrash agrees that Hashem over here, L'chatchila, commanded to do so, but nevertheless the first Medrash still refers to it as Shaloi Kahaygen. On leiten zweiten Medrash is es nitchil Shabbos. And according to the second Medrash, this is not at all in the category of Chilul Shabbos. It's Kahaygen. It's completely appropriate. It's fulfilling Hashem's command, Ani Amarti. So since we're saying that there is no argument here between the two Midrashim as far as the facts are concerned, that Hashem l'chatchila say that this is okay, so they must be arguing about a svara. After they did get that okay from Hashem, do we still look at it as something called Shaloi Kahaygen, that it's sort of Chilul Shabbos usually, or does it go to the level where this is not Chilul Shabbos at all? What is the explanation of these two Midrashim? So in Sif Beis, Rebbe brings us what it says in the Gemara about the subject. In Gemara wird gebracht, as der Tam was bisman Chanukas Beis Hamikdash Arishan loy osu Yisrael es Yom Kippurim. The Gemara discusses why when they inaugurated the first Beis Hamikdash, so the Yidden did not keep Yom Kippur. The celebration went through Yom Kippur. Is vel amru kal v'chaymer. The Yidden made the following kal v'chaymer. Ma mishkan shein kedusha sekdusha seilam the carbon yachid deicha Shabbos the isa skila if it came to the Mishkan, which its holiness is not something which is forever, and it's also dealing with a carbon of a yachid that the Nisim brought. That's their carbon as a yachid, and it pushes off Shabbos, which is a very severe isser because the punishment for this is skila mikdash. If so, when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, Kedushasai, Kedushasayla. So the holiness here is forever, the carbon tzibur. And it's a carbon tzibur that's being brought in the Beis HaMikdash when they inaugurated the Beis HaMikdash. The Yom HaKippurim, the Onish Kaddis, and the pushing off Yom Kippur, which we see is less than Shabbos because of its Einish being only Kaddis, like Kol Shekain. Definitely it's appropriate to continue the celebration into Yom Kippur. That's the Gemara. So now what do we understand from this connection the Gemara makes between learning out from what happened here with Shevet Ephraim on Shabbos to what happened regarding Yom Kippur that they pushed this off? From them is moving, so we understand there as Ladas, a Gemara, that according to the Gemara is the Akrava b'Shabbos by Chanukas HaMishkan nit given keniroi shah. It wasn't considered to be a special instruction and an exception for that hour. Shaloi Kahaygen, and therefore we could say that it's sort of inappropriate because usually it's inappropriate. Nit vide Medrash Ha'alef Hanal, and not like the first Medrash of Parashiyat Gimel that is emphasizing the Shaloi Kahaygen. Well, damn, because if it was only a Hirah Shah, wollte man von dem nicht gekannt ablernen mit der Kavachayme of the Karbanische B'Chanukes Beis HaMikdash. How could you learn out from a special exception and instruction for that hour to a later time period when they inaugurated the Beis HaMikdash? You could never learn out from a Hirah Shah. So it must be that this Gemara holds that what happened then was an instruction of Hashem, and it's not a Hirah Shah at all. Now, this Svaris aplukte, so to explain now the argument that we have here. Was this an exception? Was this a special Hirah Shah or not? Zwischen dem Medrash Aleph und der Gemara. And on the other hand, the Gemara Medrash Habeis in the second Medrash of Parsha Dalet, which seems to be going the same as the Gemara, it doesn't talk anything about Shaloi Kehoigim. It's either a Heter HaKravi B'Shabbos is given a Hira Shah or the Nit. So whether it was this a special exception for then, or no, we could learn from here for a later time period as well to the inauguration to celebrate Yom Kippur. This could be explained in a few ways, and from them the Rebbe brings two explanations here. Aleph, one explanation is as follows: the Gemara, the Gemara and the Medrash that follows like the Gemara, is following the opinion that says that one shevet, one tribe in Klal Yisrael, it has the standard and the level of being a kohol, a congregation. Not only if you have all the Klal Yisrael together, is it not an individual, but it's defined as a kohol, but even just one shevet is defined as a kohol. So the carbon brought from a shevet is a carbon from the kohol, not a carbon yachid. When a yeh says the carbon was the nasi at makriv given, is given a carbon as shevet. So since the carbon that each nasi brought is a carbon from that shevet, is this nit kenei shah. So therefore, there is no special exception here that this carbon can be brought in Shabbos. This is a carbon kohol. This is a carbon from the entire congregation of one shevet. Is mes makriv the ala karbonis tzibur, but then in Shabbos. So therefore, it could be brought in Shabbos, like the halacha always is that any carbon tzibur pushes off Shabbos. Und das was the Gemara ruft es on carbon yachid, the fact that the Gemara in the Kal V'Chomer does refer to this carbon as a carbon yachid, is this in Vergleich zum carbon tamid v'chayetze b'zeh shalafanav v'shalachrav, is only in contrast to the carbon tamid that's brought in the morning and in the afternoon. So it's sort of contrasting it to the Yom Kippur when they continued celebrating on Shabbos because of the karbanis tzibur that were brought then. Karbanis kol kahal adas Yisrael. Those are karbanis including all Yidden, ala shvatim. So therefore, it refers to it as a carbon yachad, but really, even the carbon of one shevet is a carbon tzibur. So therefore, there's no Eirasha, and we learn from there. By contrast, though, the first medrash, so its opinion is like another opinion brought in the Gemara that one shevet is not in the category of a kohol. It's still like an individual. So if that's the case, the carbon that the nasi brought is in the category of a regular carbon brought by an individual that does not push off Shabbos. Und der Heter HaKrav is given mitzad Eirasha. So the Heter to bring the carbon was a special exception for that time. And therefore the first medrash says that it was Shaloi Kehoigim, because meaning that this is not usual. This is one explanation. Beis, another explanation we can say, L'kula alme is shevet ikrikol. We can say the Gemara, the first, the second medrash quoted here, all agree that one shevet is in the category of a kohol. It includes many, and it's not a yachid. Aber dem carbon anasiyim hat jeder nasi gebracht von sein Eigentum. However, here the karbanis that the nasiyim brought, each nasi brought it from his own money. Nit von dem was the shevet b'chlaloi hat gegeben. He didn't collect money from the whole shevet to donate to bring this carbon or these karbanis. Wer steht befeirish medrash? The medrash clearly says, and Rashi brings this b'pirush al Torah, and Rashi quotes it as well, as mishaloi hevi v'loi shegava mishiftai. Every nasi of the shevet brought the karbanis from his own money and did not collect from the rest of the shevet. So according to this, we have another explanation here in the machlokes. And the machlokes zwischen the medrash aleph mit der Gemara v'chulu is, so the argument between the first medrash and the Gemara and the second medrash is, l'das ha-medrash, according to the first medrash, v'balta nasi hat far dem carbon nit goyve gevem shifta. Since every nasi is not collecting from his shevet for this carbon, bleibt es in geder von a carbon yachid was is nit teiche Shabbos. It remains to be categorized as a carbon of an individual that does not push off Shabbos. Und the far darf man sagen as the Heter HaKrav is given Eirasha. So if so, we must say that the fact that the carbon was still brought in Shabbos, this is an exception, special instruction for that time to bring it on Shabbos. Which is not the case according to the Gemara and the second medrash. Yes, it's true that he did not collect from the shevet; he brought from his own money. Is there heavy given als lamate Yehuda v'chayetze b'zeh? Yichsei HaKosav al Shiftoi, a carbon for the ganzen Shevet. However, the pasuk says the Nasi wasn't just bringing it privately as an individual. He was bringing it for the sake and representing his entire Shevet, and each Nasi gets that name, being the Nasi of his Shevet. Und sein Carbon is ein Carbon, a carbon Tzibur. Was is Deiche Shabbos? So therefore, it is a carbon Tzibur, and therefore it does push off Shabbos. It's not an exception. That's the argument here. So on one hand, they did not collect from all the Shvatim. So the first Medrash says, yeah, true, they brought it for the sake of the entire Shevet, but since we see, even after they made that decision to bring it for the entire Shevet, they still didn't collect from anybody. They wanted to keep some privacy to this carbon, so that defines it as a carbon Yachid. Second Medrash says, true, they brought from their own money, but then they brought it for the sake of the whole tzibur, so it becomes a carbon of the tzibur. Yeshleimar, based on this explanation here, we can say, as der mit is eich mavur dem die kaloshen and medrash. With this, we could explain the precise words that it says in another medrash, and this is a third medrash that the Rebbe is quoting here. We had before the medrash of Parsha Yud Gimel, and there in Parsha Yud Gimel, the first medrash that the Rebbe quoted was in Beis, in the Ois Beis of Parsha Yud Gimel. And here the Rebbe is bringing from a medrash in Parsha Yud Gimel, but it's an Ois Yud Gimel in the medrash. So there the medrash says, was sagt, das von zeh carbon Nachshon ben Aminadov. The pasuk says this is the carbon of Nachshon ben Aminadov, learned men up as mishaloi hevi v'loi shegava mishifta. We learned that he brought the karbanis from his own money and he didn't collect from the shevet. Was sagt dort b'siyam inyan, and then the medrash continues and concludes and says, zeh carbon doiches Shabbos. This carbon pushes off Shabbos. Ve'ein carbon yachid doiches Shabbos. But no other carbon which is from a yachid pushes off Shabbos. So if you look very closely into the choice of words here of the Medrash, there's sort of two opposite things that it can come out from what the Medrash is saying. Regarding the question we're discussing here, is the carbon of the Nasi defined as a carbon Sibur or as a carbon Yachid? And the Rebbe explains. Was von Stimas Lashon Hashlila, looking at the way the Medrash writes when it negates and says that usually a carbon Yachid is not Doiche Shabbos, and it uses a sort of a term that says Stima, which means ve'ein carbon Yachid Doiches Shabbos. No carbon Yachid pushes off Shabbos. Unit, it doesn't say in the Medrash ve'ein shar carbon Yachid Doiches Shabbos. Other carbonis Yachid do not push off Shabbos, or something similar. It just says ve'ein carbon Yachid Doiches Shabbos is mashma. So from this it seems as a carbon anasi is nitten gather from carbon Yachid, that the carbon nasi was not in the category of a carbon yachid, so it can't say that the other karbanis yachid aren't Doiche Shabbos. This one isn't a carbon yachid. So it's mashma from this that it's a carbon sibur. But on the other hand, if you look at the word that it says in the beginning of this limud that the Medrash here says, Ze carbon Doiches Shabbos. This carbon it pushes off Shabbos. And also from the fact that you even need a source to say that it could push off Shabbos. Is mashma as a carbon anasi ata shayches some carbon yachid. So from this it seems that this carbon is related to a carbon yachid. Und the fact that from a limud miyuchad of them suk carbon zeh as there is Doiche Shabbos, and therefore you need a special pasuk to teach me that only this carbon pushes off Shabbos. If it was a plain carbon sibur, then it's obvious that it pushes off Shabbos. Zeh carbon is telling me that only this carbon, which is sort of a carbon yachid, but it nevertheless pushes off Shabbos. So how do we understand this medrash here? Is it a carbon yachid or a carbon sibur? Well, Pia now is move on. And based on the explanation before regarding this carbon yachid that is being brought by an individual, the Nasi is bringing it from his own money, but at the same time he's bringing it for the sake of the whole tzibur of his shevet. It's understood. Because yes, there's two aspects to this. Since the Nasi is not collecting money from the whole shevet for this, as the carbon is a carbon yachid. So then it comes out that this is a carbon of an individual. Was der makriv is a Nasi lemata. But on the other hand, since the Nasi bringing the carbon is a Nasi of an entire shevet, and he's bringing it for his whole shevet, hat sein carbon dem din von a carbon sibur. There is a certain din in this carbon that it is a carbon sibur. And therefore, the Medrash says, vein carbon yachid, sort of indicating that this carbon is a carbon sibur. Okay, so this is an explanation here for two general approaches to this carbon that Shevet Ephraim brought in Shabbos. Is it a carbon yachid or a carbon sibur? So far we have quoted over here 3 different midrashim that discuss this matter. In Parsha Yud Gimel, we have the medrash of Ois Beis and then of Ois Yud Gimel, and then the medrash in Parsha Yud Dalet. So the Rebbe continues in Siv Gimel. According to this, it comes out as the zweite medrash Hanal Sif Aleph, that the second medrash of Parsha Yud Dalet quoted was Leitim is the akrava from carbon anasi b'Shabbos melachatchila given aniyin kahagen. That the carbon of the nasi brought in Shabbos was right from the beginning, perfectly fine. V'das Gemara. And what it says in the Gemara about this, that you learn from here 2 generations later on Yom Kippur, Hainu hach, they're the same opinion. As it makir given them carbon b'Shabbos, this is a carbon that was brought in Shabbos. Val says a carbon sibur, because there's no problem, it's a carbon sibur. You don't need any special instruction about this to make any exception here. However, it's difficult to accept this pshat in the medrash, in the second medrash of Parsha Dalet. As shver azoy to learn b'lashon medrash, it's difficult to learn the medrash this way, because the words of the medrash are loy al piv asa she'ani amarti leMoshe nasi echad chulu. The nasi did not bring it on Shabbos on his own. Rather, I, Hashem, told Moshe that it should be brought on Shabbos. Hainu, as this is given, amira v'tzivui miyuchad b'neged dem carbon. So this medrash here is clearly saying that there was a hirah shah, that the Eibusha commanded that it should be brought here on Shabbos. So this medrash, even though it doesn't bring up the inyan of shaloi kahoigen, but it cannot be going with the opinion of the Gemara, which holds that it's not at all a hirah shah. It's clear in the medrash that says ani amarti, meaning that it is a special instruction for this time. We'll move on with Pashtus. It's simply understood as a deichik, a chi gadol zezagen, that it would be a huge squeeze to say as the ani amarti leMoshe nasi echad chulu. When it says in the medrash that I said to Moshe that the nasi should bring the carbon, meint benit amiras nasi echad chulu. It doesn't refer to this amira here, that this nasi can bring the carbon on Shabbos. Ubechlal is nit given can amira pratis ba'isa inyan, and there was no special amira. The Eibusha didn't say anything specifically as the hirah shah regarding the subject here. No, this main man the hirah v'din klali uledeires hashevet ikri kohol. The ani amarti here refers to the fact that Hashem in general said the halacha always that a shevet is called a kohol, and therefore it's in any time period, a carbon being brought from an entire shevet could always be brought in Shabbos. That's what the ani amarti in the medrash would be referring to. Other as a carbon anasi hatadin from carbon shevet, the carbon of the nasi, even though he didn't collect from the shevet, is referred to as a carbon of a shevet. But it's a very obviously a doichik to say this, because the medrash is saying ani amarti leMoshe nasi echad, meaning that the Eibusha says here and now, a hirah shah, that this nasi should bring the carbon. So this brings back our original question: Was is svaras aplukte zwischen die zwei medrashim anal? How do we explain the difference between the 2 medrashim if both medrashim agree that there was a special exception made here? This is a hirah shah, as the Rebbe proved from the lashon of the medrash. So why does the first medrash call it shaloi kahagen, that this is a chilul Shabbos otherwise, and the second medrash does not refer to it as shaloi kahagen? So in order to understand this, the Rebbe in Siv Daled introduces over here to us to the understanding of pushing off Shabbos that we see from the Gemara and other places, that this could be explained in 2 ways. So to explain this, we can say as follows: Loit beide medrashim. Both medrashim agree zene the karbanis hamilum for Chanukas hamizbeach. So these karbanis that were brought here when they inaugurated the mizbeach was ein kamaisam ledaitis. The expression that the Rambam uses, there was nothing like this in any future generations. Given nor lefisha ubegeda hirah shah. It was for that time, and it's definitely defined as a special instruction for that hour. Azavi the andere praten from karbanis hanasim v'lachazana given l'shah begeda hirah shah. Like other details you find in the karbanis that they brought, that was only an exception for that time. One of them is the fact that they brought ketayres on the mizbeach. Never else do you find such a thing. And other details of the karbanis of the Yimei Melum that were brought, that were all a hirah shah from that time. Und nor mitzad der hirah shah is given the hetet to makriv zayin dem carbon anasi b'Shabbos. And so it was only because of this special instruction for that hour that the carbon could be brought in Shabbos. Everybody agrees to that. No, dem heter can learn of zwei fanen, but to understand and to define this heter, this permission to bring it on Shabbos, could be defined in 2 ways. One is the Isser Shabbos is the Chuya. The Isser of Shabbos here is sort of pushed off. What does this mean, pushed off? As the Isser Malacha is B'tok Vayomid. What this means is that really the Isser Malacha is there in its full strength, even regarding this carbon. Nor Chanukas HaMizbeach is Emdoiche. But inaugurating the Mizbeach, the carbon is so powerful and so important that it's able to push off that Isser that's present. That's one approach. Other, or rather we could say, in an Oifen Fun Hutra, that over here it gets pushed off to the extent that the Malacha of Shabbos is completely permissible. As the Malacha is da Melachat Chile nit nesa gefahren. Regarding these karbanis, the Malacha of Shabbos, it was not forbidden at all in the first place. Narzi is Adova Hamute b'Shabbos. There's no Malacha that applies there. It's something which is completely permitted on Shabbos. This is a concept that's brought up in many places, as the Rebbe brings here al derech hamachloikis be'im b'kuach nefesh b'Shabbos. This is an argument that you see in the Gemara and Paiskim regarding pekuach nefesh, when a yid's life is in danger, whether it pushes off Shabbos v'kama halachas, and you find this regarding God halachas as well. Tzisis doiche. Does this mean that the Isser is there, but there's something else that's more important that pushes off, or the mutter, or in a place in a time when there's a pekuach nefesh, so then the Isser of Malacha was never said in such a situation. Und das ist die Svaras Achilog zwischen die zwei Medrashim. So this is the explanation of the argument here between the two Medrashim, whether we refer to it as Chelek Hagen, or no, Ani Amarti, Hashem said, and this is perfectly fine. Leute, the Rosh, as also on Nisim Chelek Hagen, the Medrash in Parshiyut Gimel that uses the term that Nisim did something that's inappropriate, is the Heter HaKrove Nabayfim Dechuya. So the Heter, to bring the carbon, is pushing off an Isser. The Karbanis haben Deichen gewend im Isser Shabbos on Azait. The carbon, the bringing these karbanis that were so special, is pushing off the Isser of Shabbos, sort of pushing it to the side. But oich la'achat chiyeh is the Isser mitzat atzma nit batel geworden. But even after it's pushed off, it doesn't mean that there's no Isser here. There's something else that's more important than the Isser that pushes it off and allows you to do it anyways. We just push off that Isser because of how beloved these karbanis are for Hashem. The zweite Medrash halt aber, however, the other Medrash's opinion is, the Medrash in Parshi Yadalet holds, as das is boifin hutra, that it's completely mutter. Das heißt, es ist a geder shel dvar heter. Hakrovas, karbanis, chanukas, hamizbeach, b'Shabbos. This is a permissible thing to bring the karbanis on Shabbos. In den Fall, in this case, bringing these karbanis, the malachis, the Isser of Shabbos was not said here in the first place. Und der Fall ist der Medrash Madgish nit nor kemen nit sagen chilul es Shabbos or the Chelek Hagen. We can't use any term over here that they were machal Shabbos because of how special this carbon was, or that this is something which is usually inappropriate. No, adarabah. Es is a kiyum tzivoy. The Medrash emphasizes that this is totally permitted, fulfilling a tzivui of Hashem. Loi al pivasa shani amarti chulu. That Hashem said that this is completely allowed. That's the explanation here of these two midrashim. So yes, it is a hirah shah, but the question though is it pushing off the Chilul Shabbos? It could still be defined as a Chilul Shabbos, but we're just pushing it off because of how beloved the carbon is? Or is it hutra, that it's completely mutter regarding this, the Isser of Malacha was not said at all? Now in Sif Hey, the Rebbe brings this back to the other Medrash, the third Medrash that was quoted before from Parshiyut Gimel as well, but in Parshiyut Gimel, Oisyut Gimel. Now if you compare the two Medrashim in Parshiyut Gimel is base, and Parshiyut Gimel and Oisyut Gimel, there's a bit of a distinction in the Lashon that's used, and the Rebbe will explain this now. So based on this explanation here, we could also explain Favos and Medrash Anal, Soif Sif Beis, the Medrash quoted before in the end of Sif Beis, which is Parshiyut Gimel, Oisyut Gimel, Oifim Pasuk, Zek Carbon Nachshen Geiber, which is discussing the carbon of Nachshen, State der Lashon. So there, the language the Medrash says is, Ze carbon doiches ha-Shabbos, this carbon pushes off Shabbos, but ve'ein carbon yachid doiches ha-Shabbos. A carbon of any other individual does not push off Shabbos. So what's the order here in this Medrash? Frie wird gesagt, wie der Din is da. First, the Medrash tells you what the halacha is here, that this carbon does push off Shabbos. Beim carbon nasi, ze carbon doiches, that this carbon pushes off. Und danach, wie der Din is by carbon yachid bechlal, ve'ein carbon yachid. Only afterwards does he tell you, oh, by the way, usually a carbon yachid does not push off Shabbos. So this is sort of not really the usual order to say something. First, it should tell you the rule, the way it is usually, that a carbon yachid is not Doicha Shabbos. And then he could tell you the exception here. But that's not the way the Medrash puts it here. The Medrash starts off saying that here the carbon is Doicha Shabbos. Then it lets you know, oh, and usually our carbon yachid is not Doicha Shabbos. Now also the Rebbe continues, was das ist beseder Hofoch, wie es wird gesagt, in Medrash Anal Sifalev. This is the opposite order of the way it's written in the Medrash brought in the beginning of Sifalev, which is also in Parsha Yud Gimel, but in Parsha Yud Gimel Ois Beis. Over there it says, it seems to say the same thing, but it's in an opposite order. B'chol ma'kayim ein carbon yachid doiches Shabbos. The Medrash starts off with what the halacha usually is, that usually a carbon yachid does not push off Shabbos. V'kan carbon yachid doiches Shabbos. But here the carbon yachid is pushing off Shabbos. So what's the difference in the order, the way the Medrash presents this? So we can say that the difference here will depend on the two approaches explained before, whether it's duchuya or hutra. Like Medrash, as das is blois duchuya, kanal, Litn Esher Medrash, that is. According to the first Medrash, which is in Parshit Gimel Ois Beis, so its opinion is that the carbon is just pushed off. It's still a Chil Shabbos, but we push it off. Und der Rebbe is der Medrash Makdim, so therefore the Medrash begins, B'chol Makayim ein carbon yachid doiches Shabbos. He's letting you know that what the status of these carbonis are, that usually a carbon like this does not push off Shabbos. Was das is madgish, this is emphasizing vi mitzad atzmai ubechlal is as ha'maisa ha'asa shaloike hoigen. That really on its own, and usually this is something which is inappropriate. Was nor kan vet es nitche in dem fall. And then therefore we understand, the Medrash continues that only here is it being pushed off. It's just a one-time thing over here that it's unusual that it's being pushed off. That's why it begins with the rule usually, so you understand that it's only duchuya. But in the Medrash, which is also in Parshiyat Gimel, but it's later in Oisiyat Gimel, and there is this hutra. That Medrash is of the opinion, like the second Medrash quoted before, from Parshiyat Dalid, that says that no, the malacha is totally mutter. There's no chil Shabbos here at all. In this case, there was no malacha. The halachas of the malachas was not said. So therefore, the first thing the Medrash says is Zeh carbon doiches Shabbos. This pushes off Shabbos. Was the Agdame v'Adgashe is da of dem din v'hetem yuchot from carbon anasi. It's first beginning with telling you the fact that over here, this carbon, forget about what other places. This place, we don't have to begin with what in other places, because here it's anyways totally different. Over here, it's totally mutter. It pushes off Shabbos. Und erst danach, that zählt man as vein carbon yachid doiches Shabbos. And then it lets you know, other times, doing the same kind of carbon like here, it wouldn't push off Shabbos. Then it would be a malacha. But it starts off with saying that over here, it's not a malacha at all. So therefore, it doesn't begin telling you what's the story in other places, because it's totally hutra. In the Ha'ara, the Rebbe points out that even though here the Medrash does use the Lashon doiche, but the term doiche in the Medrash is not a raya, that it doesn't hold of hutra. Take a look in Ha'ara 31. Okay, so basically it comes out from what the Rebbe is saying over here, that the three Midrashim that we have, so the first Medrash in Parshiyat Gimel, in Ois Beis, in Parshiyat Gimel holds that it's only the Chuya. That's why it begins emphasizing that the Chol Mokim En Karbi Yachid Doiche, and it says that it's Shaloi Kahaygan, it's inappropriate that what was done here. Then we have a later Medrash in Parshiyat Gimel, in Ois Yud Gimel, the opinion of that Medrash, which just begins right away that this carbon pushes off Shabbos, holds that it's Hutra. And similar in Parshiyat Dalid, where the Medrash says Ani Amarti, and it's totally mutter l'chatchila, also is of the opinion of Hutra. So the Rebbe continues. Now, based on what we learned before in Sif Beis, as loy the Medrash from pasuk zeh carbon geimer is there carbon nasi al derech via carbon mashevet sibur. So we explained before the exact words of the Medrash here. This is the second Medrash of Parshiyat Gimel in Ois Yud Gimel. So the lashon of the Medrash there indicates that the carbon that the Nasi brought is similar to a carbon sibur. Because the Rebbe was medayik there. The lashon that the Medrash says zeh carbon doiche, and then it doesn't use the term of ve'ein shar carbon yachid. It just says ve'ein carbon yachid. It's mashma that it is somewhat of a carbon sibur. So then it comes out kemen zogin as das is the tam v'sibes haplukte von die zwei Medrashim. So if so, we could explain that this itself is the reason for the machlekes between the two Medrashim in Parshiyat Gimel itself. Parshiyat Gimel Ois Beis and Parshiyat Gimel in Ois Yud Gimel. According to the first medrash in Parashah Gimel in Eis Beis, as is given Shaloika Hagen Duchuya, that emphasizes that this is inappropriate. It's only pushing off the malacha, the chilul Shabbos. Is the carbon anasi, a carbon yachid? The carbon of the nasi is a carbon of an individual. Wie verstandig from the lashon it's understood from the lashon that it says b'chol makom ein carbon yachid chulu v'kan carbon yachid. And here, this carbon yachid does push off Shabbos. So the first medrash in Eis Beis is of the opinion that this is a regular carbon yachid. And therefore, the special instruction here is only pushing off the chilul Shabbos, but it remains a chilul Shabbos since it's only a carbon yachid. But according to the second medrash in Parashah Gimel, Eis Gimel, where it says Zeh, a little bit of a different lashon. It says Zeh carbon doiche chulu, as es hat adin al derech via carbon shevet. So this carbon has the halacha of a carbon brought from the whole shevet, as the Rabbi explained before. He didn't collect from the shevet, but he's bringing it for the whole shevet. Is Shabbos hutra legabe. So therefore, this medrash says that the carbon of Shabbos is completely mutter. That's the opinion of the second medrash in Parashah Gimel. Okay, but now though the thing is, the Rabbi already proved before in Eis Gimel that the medrash in Parashah Yudalid is not of the opinion that this is a carbon sibur. Because if it was a carbon sibur, so then why would the medrash in Parashah Yudalid use the term ani amarti? That Hashem especially says ahira ashah to push it off. So if so, it basically comes out that we have two medrashim that both agree that it's hutra, but it's not exactly the same hutra. You have the medrash in Parashah Gimel, Eis Gimel, that says hutra, but it's hutra because it's like a carbon sibur to some extent. And then you have the medrash in Parashah Yudalid that also says hutra, but it's hutra even though it's a hira asha, even though it's not a carbon sibur, it's a carbon yachid, as the Rabbi proved from the lashon of ani amarti. So the Rabbi now points this out there. But now would come out though, as b'inyanenu is oich in the geder von hutra gufe da medrashim micholakim. So it would come out that there is an argument here actually regarding the hutra itself. If you define the fact that it pushed off Shabbos as hutra, there's an argument about this. In other words, till here we're thinking that, okay, so we have three medrashim. The first medrash in Parashah Gimel holds it's the chuya, and then the other two medrashim hold that it's hutra. But that's not exactly the case. The other two medrashim that hold hutra are coming to the conclusion that it's hutra, but it's not the same. Like medrash azeh carbon doiche Shabbos chulu, the medrash of Parashah Gimel, Eis Gimel, that says zeh carbon doiche Shabbos is Shabbos hutra, while the carbon anasi is al derech carbon sibur. The reason it's hutra is because it's similar to a carbon sibur. So that explains why it's taka hutra. Because for a carbon which is basically like a carbon sibur, we can say that it would be hutra, totally mutter. There's no malacha if it's a carbon sibur. But according to the medrash in Parashah Yudalid, that's brought before in Sif Aleph, that says and then it says Shani Amarti. So this medrash is clearly saying that it still is a carbon yachid, but nevertheless Ani Amarti. The Eibishter himself says that it's okay and that it's hutra. Was held as hutra kanal Sif Dalit. So this medrash also holds that it's completely mutter. And that's why this medrash doesn't say anything about Chelek Eigen. And it's telling you that Hashem said that it's totally mutter. Is mashma as a satkahata din from carbon yachid. That this medrash holds that it is a carbon yachid. Nor valania martichulu is zehekriv b'Shabbos. But nevertheless, Hashem says, and therefore it becomes completely mutter on Shabbos. So the Rebbe is sort of implying a question over here. It's understood to accept the idea of hutra if we're talking about the medrash that says that this is a carbon which is a carbon sibur. So therefore, with carbon sibur, it's hutra. But if it's a carbon yachid, completely a carbon yachid, so then we're sort of back to the original question: what is the svaras achiluk between the two medrashim of Parashah Gimel Eis Beis and Parashah Yudalid, where the Parashah Gimel holds that it's duchuya because it's a carbon yachid, and Parashah Yudalid holds that it's hutra, even though it also agrees that it's a carbon yachid. So we still don't really have an explanation of what's the svaras hamachlekes between them. So here in Sivav, the Rebbe will continue and bring here from yet another medrash, a fourth medrash. Okay, and with this, it will lead us into a completely new understanding of this whole subject and to see these four medrashim in a completely new light. Wenn man das verstehen, behagte noch a vierte Medrash be Parsha Seinu, Parsha Yudalet binyan zeh. So we'll understand this with introducing yet a fourth Medrash on this subject, also in Parsha Yudalet. So again, halt cup. Before we had Parsha Yudalet, and there the Medrash was an Ois Aleph. This isn't Parsha Yudalet, but an Ois Beis. So here the Medrash talks about the same subject, but it says it differently. This is what the Medrash says. Mi iktimani va'ashalim. Simply a pasuk which means who comes before me, before Hashem, that I have to pay him. Hashem really doesn't have to give anything to anyone. So the pasuk there said, the Medrash there says that this is actually could be understood that it's referring over here to this carbon. Medaber be Yosef. This pasuk is speaking about Yosef. Shehu hiktim v'shimeres haShabbos at shalei nigna. That he kept Shabbos before Hikdimani, so to speak, before Hashem even commanded to keep Shabbos. As it says the story in Parshas Miketz, how Yosef kept Shabbos. So Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter says, Yosef, ata shamarta as Shabbos, at shalei nitna Torah. So Yosef, you kept Shabbos before Hashem gives the Torah. Chayecha, I promise you, Shani Mishalim Leven Bincha, that I will pay back to your descendant, Shiei Makriv Karbanis b'Shabbos, that he will bring Karbanis on Shabbos. Masha'en Yochid Makriv, no individual is allowed to bring a carbon on Shabbos. Va'alai lekabel karbani b'ratzin. And I, Hashem says, I will accept his carbon willingly, happily, as a reward for this, that you kept Shabbos before the Torah is given. Is tamua, so this Medrash is difficult to understand. Vi pas tezage. How is it fitting to say here, as the schar of Shmiras Shabbos is, that the reward for keeping Shabbos is what? Sheyehei makriv karbonai b'Shabbos mashen yachid makriv. That he can bring a carbon on Shabbos, which usually cannot be brought on Shabbos. Apa'ule, welche is bechlal der hepech from Shmiras Shabbos. An action which usually is the opposite of keeping Shabbos. So how is that a reward for keeping Shabbos before Hashem gives the Torah? Loi mi baye. Now this is a question, needless to say, the carbon nasi is dem Shabbos. If we are to accept as it was defined before, that it's still a chil Shabbos, but the law for Hashem for these carbonis pushes off Shabbos. Was then will taste this noch als shaloika eigen. So then, as the Medrash defines it, it's still considered to be sort of inappropriate. End from chil Shabbos. That this is an action that otherwise is chil Shabbos. No, by Rosh where there is a nitche bepoil to leave in carbon. But in actuality, Hashem allows the Chil Shabbos to be done for the sake of the carbon, but it's still defined as a Chil Shabbos. So for sure, according to this opinion, it's very difficult to say that this act of Chil Shabbos is a reward for Yosef keeping Shabbos. But the question here is further, even if we are to say that in this case, the malacha done, the carbon brought is not defined as a malacha at all, it's completely permitted. All this means is that yes, in this case, there is no desecration of Shabbos at all. But there is no action or content in what's happening here that could be defined as keeping Shabbos. That therefore should be a reward for keeping Shabbos. So what does this mean? Why is this the schar? How could the Medrash here say that this is a schar for keeping Shabbos? Is the phone gufa gedrungen? So from this itself, it's clear we can prove as leit dem Medrash that according to this Medrash here, hat der carbon hanesim b'Shabbos oivgetona hisafe and shmira Shabbos. Bringing the karbanis of the Nesiim on Shabbos is not only something which can be done on Shabbos, it's pushing off Shabbos, it's allowed on Shabbos, but it actually adds to the kedusha of Shabbos, to keeping Shabbos, and it's a reward for this that Yosef kept Shabbos. So here, the Rebbe in Sib Zayin will explain what this means, and the Rebbe will first come back to the four midrashim that we had here regarding the subject and categorize them now in a completely different way to understand what the difference between the approach of these various midrashim regarding this carbon here of Ephraim that was brought in Shabbos. So the explanation for this we can say as follows. The vier Maimare HaMedrash Anal teilen sich bechlolus of zwei Sugim. The four different statements regarding this story here that was brought from the Medrash can be divided generally into two categories. And as the Rebbe will point out here, two of the Midrashim are in Parsha Yud Gimel, in Parsha Yud Gimel Ois Beis, and in Parsha Yud Gimel Ois Yud Gimel. And then the other two Midrashim are in the second Medrash, or the other two Midrashim that is, right, is in Parsha Yud Daled, one on Ois Aleph and one on Ois Beis. So the drash, as does an given carbon shaloika hoigen, the medrash that says that the carbon was brought inappropriately, und der drash, and then so too the other medrash that says zek carbon doiches Shabbos, that only this carbon pushes off Shabbos, vein carbon yachid doiches Shabbos, and no other carbon pushes off Shabbos. Beide in Parsha Yud Gimel, both quoted in Parsha Yud Gimel, stellen sich auf klolos inyan from karbonis anasiyim. If you look what these medrashim are coming to address, it's not really coming to address specifically the carbon of Shevet Ephraim. It's coming to address in general the uniqueness about all the karbonis of the Nesiyim brought. And then one of the novelties about the karbonis of the Nesiyim, Tzvishin andere, amongst other chidushim that the Medrash points out there, is given that was the carbon on Nesiyim adoich given Shabbos, is the fact that the carbon pushed off Shabbos. But it's not coming to address specifically the Maila and the special thing of the carbon of Shevet Ephraim. This is just one detail that shows Bechlal on the Maila of all the karbonis of the Nesiyim. That's what both Midrashim in Parsha Yud Gimel are coming to address. Vashenk in the other two drashes beide in Parsha Yud Daled, and by contrast, the other two drashes both brought in Parsha Yud Daled. Shani Amartichu, the first medrash that says Shani Amarti, that I Hashem said to push off Shabbos. Oh, and the other medrash just quoted here, Miik Demani Vashalim, the special reward for Yosef that kept Shabbos before Hashem gave the Torah. Stellen sich auf dem Pasuk bei Yom Hashvi Naso Livnei Ephraim. The medrash here is coming to address this carbon on the seventh day for the Shevet Ephraim, und reden b'miyuchad, and they both are addressing specifically wegen Meilas HaKarbon, was the Nasi Ephraim hat makriv gewen b'Yom HaShabbos. And they both are addressing the carbon that Shevet Ephraim, that Nasi Ephraim brought on Shabbos. So that's the general difference. So which opens up to us a different understanding over here of the differences between these midrashim. So based on this we can say as the Chelek HaKlali zwischen die zwei Sugim is the general difference between the midrashim of Parsha Yud Gimel and the midrashim of Parsha Yud Daled is as follows. In the erste zwei drashes, welche reden wegen karbonis an Nesiyim bechlal, in the first two drashes which are addressing the karbonis of Nesiyim in general, wird herausgebracht wie der Iyum von der Chiyas HaShabbos is a din, was is verbunden mit klolos karbonis an Nesiyim lechanukas HaMizbeach. The Medrash is explaining to you that it pushes off Shabbos, from where does this stem? It stems from the fact that these are special karbonis of the Nesiyim to inaugurate the Mizbeach. This says as mitzad Maila klolos for Chanukas HaMizbeach al yidei karbonis HaNesiyim is the akrava deicha Shabbos, because of the general Maila of all karbonis of the Nesiyim to inaugurate the Mizbeach. So therefore they can push off Shabbos. That's what the first medrash is saying. Aber in the other zwei medrashim. On the other hand, though, the other two midrashim of Parsha Yud Daled was reden wegen dem carbon miyuchad von Nasi Ephraim b'Yom HaShabbos, that speak of the special carbon that the Nasi of Ephraim is bringing specifically on Shabbos. Is mevuer over here? What's being explained is v'didchie is nit mitzad di klolos karbonos hanesiyim. So this is not speaking of the fact that we're pushing off Shabbos, because in general the karbonos hanesiyim are so unique and special that they push off Shabbos. Nit kein din in Chanukas HaMizbeach. The Midrashim here are not telling you that this stems from the general fact that we're coming to inaugurate the Mizbeach, and inaugurating the Mizbeach could be even on a Shabbos, nor vidas is adin in Hilchos Shabbos. Rather, the Midrashim here are telling you that this is a halacha that stems from Shabbos itself. As mitzat Shabbos, that it's from the perspective of Shabbos itself, hot a nasi gedarf demot makriv zayin dem carbon. So Nasi Ephraim, bringing the carbon here on the seventh day on Shabbos, it has to be brought on Shabbos. Shabbos itself demands that the carbon should be brought on Shabbos. That's the general difference between the Midrashim of Parsha Yud Gimel and the Midrashim of Parsha Yud Daled. So in Sif Chesta, the Rebbe will continue and explain, but we have two Midrashim in Parsha Yud Gimel and two Midrashim in Parsha Yud Daled. So this can be defined in various ways. And in dem Gufe, as zadin in Hilchos Shabbos, so yes, the Rebbe is machadish here that Shabbos itself demands. It stems from Shabbos, that the carbon should be brought on Shabbos. But in this itself, as zadin in Hilchos Shabbos, can we learn in tvei oifanim. This can be defined in two ways. Aleph, one is, as mitzad, Hilchos Shabbos is the akrove mutter. That Hilchos Shabbos is telling you that this carbon is completely allowed. Basically, like the Rabbi said before, hutra. Das heißt, das ist nicht ein Inyan, was ist Mutter mitzad meiles ha-karbonis hanesiyim l'chanukas ha-mizbeach. But here we're defining the heter a bit differently. The heter does not stem from the special mila that this carbon has, that it's inaugurating the mizbeach and so on. As Torah sagt, as the mila from karbonis hanesiyim is so great, that the level of these karbonis is so great, this outweighs any malacha on Shabbos to the point that it's completely mutter. No, rather, this is a tnai in isurei malacha b'Shabbos. This is a condition in the whole isur of malacha that Hashem says on Shabbos. As b'yachas tzudi karbonis is malachatchila nitchal der isur malacha b'Shabbos. When Hashem commands the Yisurim and the Malachas of Shabbos, so it's a built-in condition that does not apply to this special Shabbos here when the Nesiim bring their Karbanis. So yes, it's a halacha that stems from Shabbos. But what is the halacha though? The halacha here is that Malachas don't apply here. It's totally mutter. Al derech v'im begefind bekame mekaimis, as we find in many places, b'negeya esse doichelois esse. There's a concept that when you have a conflict between a mitzvah aseh that has to be fulfilled and fulfilling the mitzvah will also be doing a lois eseh. So the rule is that the eseh pushes off the lois eseh as the eseh. So one of the ways to define this is as the eseh vertatnai from welchen den lav is abhängig tolit. The fulfillment of the eseh sort of is a condition in the isser of the lav. The isser of the lav is only applied if there's no essa that has to be done. If an essa has to be done, so then there's no lav in the first place here. The whole lav is conditional to the fact that there's no necessity of a mitzvah. The lav is melchatchila nitchal and wenn es ist da kegenim an essa. There is no lav in the first place taking effect when there's a mitzvah here. The same here. Shabbos is lachatchila not in effect mitzad hilchas Shabbos because of these karbanos that have to be brought on this Shabbos. But then there's a second approach to this understanding that this stems from Shabbos. Hakravis hakarbanis b'Shabbos is a chelik from mitzvah Shabbos. Bringing the karbanis on Shabbos is actually not a heter. It's part of the fulfilling of the mitzvah of Shabbos. Kishein v'mitzad kedusha Shabbos and malachas asa b'Shabbos. Just like because of the holiness of Shabbos, so malachas are not allowed on Shabbos. Azoi is Kedushas Shabbos mechayev mizul makir zayin musafi Shabbos. The holiness of Shabbos itself obligates that you should bring the karbonis of musaf on every Shabbos. The carbon that the Nasi brings on this day of Shabbos was a marti that the Eibush says them carbon shall Nasi Ephraim Shabbos that it should be brought in Shabbos. It's a saying like the carbon musaf that's not a heter. Adarab, Shabbos demands this. It's adding to the kedusha of Shabbos. Und durch dem Davke wird Niskayim Shmira Shabbos Kidaboi. It's only through this that we are fulfilling Shabbos to its fullest extent. It adds to the Kedusha of Shabbos. So the Rebbe brings an example for this as well. Val derech, this can be said to be similar, and here the Rebbe emphasizes it's only al derech, similar. We find this idea and an opinion that says this also regarding the fact that if a Yid's life is in danger, it pushes off Shabbos. As das meint, so that what this really means is nid belois. Not only as the pekuach nefesh is doiched and ism malacha b'Shabbos, that because of the importance of the life of a Yid, we push off the malacha which is a chil Shabbos, but you could be mechal Shabbos. That's the chuya. Or even to take it a step further, afil as the malacha vert mutter b'Shabbos. We don't even define it as a chil Shabbos at all. The life of Yid is so important that this is a complete permissible act to do this in Shabbos. Now, furthermore, nor pekuach nefesh is adin in shmira Shabbos. Pushing off Shabbos for the life of a Yid is actually not pushing off. Shabbos itself demands this. It stems from Shabbos that you're keeping Shabbos by saving the life of a Yid. The Rebbe adds, "V'pizeh yumtak was es steht in Hilchos Shabbos." With this we can understand Geschmack better why this halacha of pekuach nefesh, pushing off Shabbos, is part of Hilchos Shabbos. Shabbos itself demands this. Das is meisif in shmira Shabbos. Saving the life of a Yid adds to the keeping of Shabbos. We learn this up from Vishamru b'nei Yisrael as a Shabbos, and this halacha that you push off Shabbos to save the life of Yid is actually learned from the very pasuk where it says Vishamru b'nei Yisrael as a Shabbos, that Yidden keep Shabbos. Ubeloshen Oyer the Oyer HaChaim there says as follows: Why do I say desecrate Shabbos for a Yid that's sick and his life has to be saved? There's no desecration here. Adarabbe zekori shmira Shabbos. You're keeping Shabbos. You're adding to the Kedusha of Shabbos, which is what's Shabbos? Shabbos is a bond between Hashem and the Yidden. So therefore, saving the life of a Yid only adds to the teichen, to the content and the keeping of Shabbos. That's the second way that we can also define over here regarding the karbanis that Shevet Ephraim brought on Shabbos. It's not just a heter, but it's actually stemming from Shabbos itself, that it's a part of the mitzvah of Shabbos. So now we come back to explain the Midrashim that the Rebbe brought. Apizeh and Siftes, the Rebbe continues, Apizeh is move on, der Oiftu von die letzte zwei Midrashim shebe Parshi Yedalid. What is the Chiddush here? What is the Medrash telling us in the two Midrashim in Parshi Yedalid, legabe the erste zwei shebe Parshi Gimel, in contrast to the other two Midrashim that are brought in Parshi Gimel? Like the Midrashim in Parshi Gimel, according to both of the Midrashim in Parshi Gimel, is the heter ha'akrove mitzad dem din kloli from karbanas hanesiyim kana. So the source of the heter comes from the fact that these are karbanas nesiyim. We're not talking very specifically about Shabbos, about the carbon brought in Shabbos, but b'chlal, karbanas nesiyim are so powerful and so unique that from there stems the heter to bring on Shabbos. But we have those two Midrashim in Parshi Gimel. So what is the difference between them? The chilik b'neim is not in them. See, this is the chuya or the hutra. Kanal sifhei. The difference between the Medrash in Parshiyat Gimel Ois Aleph and the one that comes later in Parshiyat Gimel and Oisid Gimel is whether it's just pushed off, as the Medrash in Parsha Aleph or Ois Aleph, that is, emphasizes that it's Shaloika Hagen, or in Oisid Gimel where it does not say Shaloika Hagen. Rather, it begins right away saying that Zeh Karban Doicha Shabbos, to emphasize that it's totally Hutra. But even the Hutra, from where does the Heta stem? From the uniqueness and the specialness of this carbon being the Karbanis to inaugurate the Mishkan. On the other hand, when we shift over to the Midrashim in Parshi Yadal, they are addressing the specialty that there is of this carbon today on Shabbos. Halten beide, both of the Midrashim here, they are of the opinion, as Adin in Shabbos, that it comes from Shabbos. Shabbos itself demands that it should be brought in Shabbos. Und der Rebbe ist in beide Midrashim nicht mudgish die Ausgeteiltkeit von dem Carbon, damit, was ist kein Carbon Sibber. So therefore over here, the Midrashim in Parshi Yadalid does not in any way highlight the idea that these karbonis are special, that it's similar to a carbon Sibor, and therefore Kibidei Shabbos. Und der Fall soll der Akrava sein begede Hutra, and that would be the reason why it's completely permitted. Wie in the Medrash Anal, Parshiyat Gimel, Zeh Karban Doicha Shabbos, like the second Medrash in Parshiyat Gimel, that the heter there stems from the fact that it's Karbanis Nesiyim, which are similar to a carbon Sibra, and therefore it's Doicha Shabbos. But over here, the Medrash doesn't bring at all any hint to the fact that this is similar to a carbon Sibra, and therefore it's Doicha Shabbos. That's not where the heter stems from. Nor fakert, on the contrary. In Zeh is the Adgoshe, the carbon Nasi is gather from a carbon Yachid. In both the Midrashim here, in Parshi Yadalid, it's emphasizing the fact that this is, in fact, a carbon from one individual, as the Lashon of the Medrash is. In the first Medrash it says, V'haloi ein carbon Yachid doiches Shabbos, the carbon of one individual does not push of Shabbos, and V'zeh hikriv b'Shabbos, and he did bring it on Shabbos. So Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shani Amarti, this is a special Eirah Shah to bring a carbon Yachid on Shabbos. And the second Medrash in Parshi Yadalit says, Shihei makriv karbonai b'Shabbos, ma she'ein Yachid makriv, that he can bring his carbon on Shabbos, even though an individual usually does not bring the carbon. Why is the Medrash emphasizing that this is a carbon Yachid? It's sort of minimizing the importance of this carbon, that it's only a carbon Yachid, and still it pushes off Shabbos. Varom, the heter, hakravas ha-carbon, ladas Medrashim elu. The heter, the permission to bring these karbonis on Shabbos, according to both of these Medrashim in Parshi Yadalid, is nid, weil the karbonis haben in sich an inye v'toikev miyuchad. Und the Farzen is the Teiche Shabbos by Fishel Hutra. It's not because of the Mila that these karbonis have, that they are so special and maybe even a carbon Sibur, and therefore it can be totally permitted to bring them on Shabbos. No, on the contrary, not because of the Mila of the carbon. Nor weil Shabbos zogt. Azeh Yaakov b'Shabbos afilu zayin de karbonis hayachid. It's Shabbos that demands and says that bringing these karbonis on Shabbos, it stems from Shabbos that says that even if it is a carbon yachid, and mitzvah the karbonis, there is nothing unique about them enough to push off Shabbos or to be mat to Shabbos. But nevertheless, Shabbos demands that it should be brought in Shabbos. That's what the Medrash is emphasizing here. Here, nor die zwei Medrashim teilen sich in die zwei Eifanim Anal via Zoi is das Adin Shabbos. But here we have the two approaches brought before in Sif Ches that the two Medrashim in Parsha Yudalid are arguing about. What does this mean? What exactly does Shabbos demand when the Medrashim here are saying that it should be brought in Shabbos? Loit Medrash Shani Amarti. In the first Medrash that says Shani Amarti, that Hashem says, I said that it could be brought in Shabbos, is das Ki'ilu v'atnai in Shabbos. It's as if a condition in Shabbos here was said, as Shabbos zogt, as if them carbon is milchatchili v'tchal de'eser Shabbos. That Shabbos is sort of saying that regarding this carbon, there is from the first place no issa to bring it on Shabbos. The Rebbe werd in Medrash bavaren shaloi toima. Therefore, the Medrash has to come and to explain. Don't say He'echel is a Shabbos. How could you desecrate Shabbos? Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shani Amarti. So the Medrash comes and says, no, the Eibishter said that there is a heter that l'chatchila you can bring it on Shabbos. As says Bechlal nid beged Chilul Shabbos, that the Medrash is clarifying that it's not to be defined at all as desecrating Shabbos. Well, this is al piyat tzivui. Because Ani Amarti, Hashem himself said that there's a heter, and the heter stems from Shabbos itself. It's sort of a condition in the Isra of Shabbos itself. Al derech, wie wir gefind, dem Loshen in Paiskim, we find this similar also, what's brought in Paiskim, B'pirish HaMechilte, explaining what it says in the Mechilte regarding Mechalalel Mois Yumas. One that desecrates Shabbos is liable, and his Misa is his punishment. And then the Pasuk says, U'bayom HaShabbos Shnei Kvasim. On Shabbos you have to bring 2 lambs for the Musaf. So the Medrash says, Shneim b'dibur echad nemru. They were both said together. L'hoidia shebishah shehut hazeh nes hazeh. At the very same time that there was the heter to bring the carbon on Shabbos, that's the same time that Hashem gives the Isser of all the malachas. Ulalamed ke'ein zeh chil Shabbos. This teaches me that there's no chil Shabbos here, meaning because it's sort of a condition within the when the Eibishter says the malacha, the chil Shabbos itself, the Eibishter at the very same time says a condition that these karbanos of the musaf are not included. That's the way some place can define this. So similar over here, the karbanos, according to the first medrash in Parashat Yudalid, the karbanos of the Nesiim, Shabbos itself says that this is mutter. It's a din in Hilchos Shabbos. Right, the medrash was sagt, and das ist given begedes schar, if them was Yosef Shimmer as a Shabbos actually nitna. But then according to the second medrash in Parashat Yudalid, that says that they brought the karbanos on Shabbos, it could be defined as a reward for this that Yosef kept Shabbos. So that it comes out that this goes a step further. As this is not atnai in Shabbos, this is not just a condition, so to speak, in Shabbos, that it's allowed. As carbon Nasi Ephraim from Miluim is mutter b'Shabbos, that this carbon of Nasi Ephraim is allowed to be brought on Shabbos. Nor as Zeh is men mekayim boifin chiyuvi mitzvahs shmira Shabbos, but rather in the positive sense, in an active way. You're actually adding to keeping Shabbos. Their carbon is meisif in Kedushas Shabbos. Bringing this carbon on Shabbos is actually adding to the Kedusha of Shabbos. That's why it could be a reward for Yosef that kept Shabbos. And here again, the Rebbe brings the Mechilta quoted before regarding the Karbanis Musaf brought in Shabbos, but explains it in a deeper way. And this is similar to what's explained elsewhere. Explaining the Mechilta quoted before, but on a deeper level, as das was b'dibur echad nemru, the fact that the Isser of Chil Shabbos and the Chiyuv to bring the Karbanis of Musaf on Shabbos was said together, meant nit nor as a nit soiser zelazeh. It doesn't only mean that the Eibishter says it together, so they are not a contradiction, nor beide haben dem selben Teichen Kedushas Shabbos, but rather what it's really saying is that they both have the same content adding to the Kedusha of Shabbos. How ze is Aleph durch Hakravas Hakvasim. Kedushas Shabbos is also brought and added through bringing the Karbanis of Mosif, the Kvasim, and Beis durch Islam Malacha, and through the Islam Malacha. Same over here. This is adding to the Kedusha of Shabbos that Shevet Ephraim brought the Karbanis on Shabbos. Und the Far is das Aschar Masim zu Shmira Shabbos to Yosef. So this could explain how the Medrash could say that bringing the Karbanis on Shabbos, which is usually a Chil Shabbos, so even if you say it's Hutra, but usually it's still nevertheless an act of Chil Shabbos, but nevertheless here, this Medrash says that this is an appropriate reward for Yosef keeping Shabbos before Hashem gives the Torah. Because Yosef added and kept Shabbos, he added, before it was given. What this Medrash is saying is, bringing these Karbanos and Shabbos is also going to add to the keeping and to the holiness of Shabbos. Legavi andere Yidden, more than what other Yidden kept. As Dafke ben Bincha, that only your descendant hat meisef gewend b'kedushas Shabbos, is adding to the holiness of Shabbos durch makriv zayin a carbon miyuchad b'Shabbos, by bringing a unique and special carbon on Shabbos. So that's the pshat in the second medrash in Parashah Dalet. So we have here the hesber of all four medrashim, Parashah Gimel and Parashah Dalet, and especially here the punchline, this last point of here regarding the medrash that says that bringing the carbon on Shabbos, this itself is adding to Shabbos, and it's a reward for keeping Shabbos before it was given. Okay, but as you see over here, we're not done. We're learning weiter. And here we have Hisofas Nukudais L'Taisvus Bir. Was added later, points, Bekitzer, to add an explanation to this Chiddush here, that this is a schar for Yosef that kept Shabbos before it was given. So let's continue, Sif Yud. That inyan is of an Achal's Deirish Bir. However, this pshat here, how the Kabban is being brought in Shabbos could be considered as a reward for Yosef keeping Shabbos, still needs an additional explanation. Emes Take. Yes, it's true as was explained, as das was Nasi Ephraim od Makir Gevem Karbone b'Shabbos. The fact that Nasi Ephraim brought his carbon on Shabbos can zayin aschar if Shmir Shabbos Yosef. We now understand how it's possible that it can be a reward for this that Yosef kept Shabbos. The far was the akrava is meisef in kedusha Shabbos kanal, as explained, because bringing this carbon on Shabbos adds to the kedusha of Shabbos, similar to the karbanis musaf that add to Shabbos. But the question still is, was is over their time? What's the reason though? Was der schar hat sich ausgedrückt dafke in a meise welche is mitzad atzmai heipich von Shmir Shabbos. But why? What is the reason that the reward for what Yosef did is given and is expressed that we're going to add to the kedusha of Shabbos? How? Dafke by an action which is usually the opposite of keeping Shabbos. So we can understand when we have an example for this from the Karban Musaf, and it's possible that this should also become an added kedusha to Shabbos. But couldn't Davish find any other schar to add and intensify the keeping of Shabbos the way it usually is, the way we keep Shabbos usually in any other mitzvah of Shabbos? Why is it over here by doing something which is usually heipach of keeping Shabbos? Is the Asbara Bezeh, so to explain this is also dafke this, by him getting a reward that his descendants bring a carbon which is usually not keeping Shabbos. This is dafke the schar. So the explanation is as follows. Das was Yosef hat mekayel gewen in mitzvah von Shmir Shabbos ad shaloi nitna. The fact that Yosef keeps Shabbos, and he keeps it before Hashem gave it at Matan Torah, is a bavais. What this proves is, as ein Shmir Shabbos, that him keeping Shabbos is not just a matter of time, that he kept it earlier before Hashem gave the command and the obligation to fulfill. But rather, him keeping Shabbos is von an ort. It's in a place or on a level, was es noch hecher von dem ort nitna, which is higher than the level of the Shabbos when it was given at Matan Torah here in this world. It's a different level of keeping Shabbos. It's on a higher level, as the Rebbe will elaborate. And the Rebbe shows us here in the words of the Medrash itself, Kepirish Nitna. What does it mean that he kept Shabbos before it was given? It doesn't say before the time of but before it was given. The Zach is da from Frier. Nitna means that this is something that exists from before. Und sie wird noch gegeben lemisha nitna. Then it's sort of being given to another person. It's given on a different level, but it exists before on a higher level. And that's where Yosef kept Shabbos, on a higher level. As das verstandig, as in jeder Ort wo Shabbos is nitna, in every level, in every place where Shabbos is given there, is applied there, is the Kedusha and Shmir Shabbos, let them mokim shabai nitna. The keeping Shabbos, the holiness of Shabbos, is accordingly on that level, in the place, and to whom it's given. And the Rebbe brings an example for this in halacha. Me'en va'al derech v'migefimt an halacha. Somewhat similar we can compare to what we find in halacha, the chiluk tzivishon talmidei chachamim, Poilim, balibatim. What's brought in Shulchan Aruch regarding what talmidei chachamim should be occupying their time with on Shabbos, and workers, balibatim, people that are working all week, how they should occupy their time on Shabbos. Poilim or balibatim yaski yesib b'Torah b'Shabbos. For people that are working all week and don't get a chance to learn all week, so for them, Shabbos is the time that they should be learning Torah. For Talmidei Chachamim, for them, it's more appropriate that they should express their pleasure in Shabbos in their eating and drinking. So, and for every person, according to his profession or his occupation, we apply Shabbos accordingly. Another example is the Chiluk HaKlali. We come to a more general difference regarding how Shabbos is kept. Wie der Ein HaShvise v'HaShmire is beim Eibishten. ceasing and stopping from doing work on Shabbos as it exists by Hashem himself. Ki boi shavas n'kol malachtai. Hashem stopped doing work on Shabbos. Was es shvise von dibur va'amira. Hashem stops from uttering the words that he created the world with. Basara mamaris nivra ilam. The world that was created with the 10 utterances. That's the way Shabbos applies in the world of Hashem. Ulamata is the inyan hashvise be'ikir von asiyah. And over here, Shabbos below, that applies to the Yidden in this world, is primarily in action. The malachas, the 39 malachas of Shabbos that are refraining from work in action. So we see that there are different levels of refraining from work that applies in each level accordingly. So the fun is move on. From this we understand that we could even take this even a level higher. As in the oilam, lamaila versus hecher von oilam adibur. So going to a level of godliness and in a world which is higher than Hashem speaking and communicating to create a world. In them oilam was loimishtoi b'milidad yaita, in a world, in a place where Hashem does not come down to speak these mundane words to create a world. This is the expression that it says in the Zohar, that when Hashem creates the world, this is Hashem coming down to relate and communicate to create a world. Was gate of the Asaram Amaris, that expression of the Zohar refers to the 10 utterances that the world was created with them. So above this is Kedushas HaShabbos v'oingai, the holiness of Shabbos, the pleasure of Shabbos, nit shvise von dibur, so it's not stopping from uttering words, nor in der shvise von yirides v'tzimtzumi ha'olam v'gvura shalai, but rather here there's a ceasing and stopping levels of tzimtzum, levels of coming down on a much greater level, on a much higher level, any kind of concealment that there is on a much higher level, even beyond Hashem coming down to dibur. There are tzimtzumim, and there are the Eibusha coming down on a higher level that sees on Shabbos, and you go up above that. Another example for this, al derech Gehenim, similar to what it says in the Medrash regarding the Gehenim on Shabbos. Was for Shabbos kol shultani rugzin, all the controls of the anger of Hashem, umari didina, and the various masters of judgment, kulu arkin v'sabarim, they all run away and they don't exist on Shabbos. So we see this even in higher worlds. This is an example for something that's even higher than Dibur. In Gan Eden, so even Gan Eden, which every day of the week is a place of pleasure and nanim and so on, but on Shabbos, you get elevated even higher than that. So that even Gan Eden itself all week is higher than the Dibur of Hashem, but nevertheless, you go even higher. So Shabbos is kept in every world accordingly. So this, now we understand really what this means, that Yosef kept Shabbos actually nitna before it was given a Matan Torah. By him hat mehr gewend der Inyan Shabbos, wie is in an Olam welches hecher von Eretz sheboi nitna Shabbos. By Yosef, he kept Shabbos, and by him, that level of such a high world was shining by him, and therefore he kept Shabbos higher than the world where Shabbos was given. Sein Schwiese ist von a hecheren Inyan wie der Schwiese mit Melache, was nimmt sich von dem Boi Shabbos von Olam Adibur Asadam Amaris. So therefore he keeps Shabbos on a level in a world which is even higher than keeping Shabbos in the world of Olam Adibur when Hashem comes down to create the world Asadam Amaris. Und der Einige Shabbos in der Madrege, so the pleasure of Shabbos in this level, Achlei Nitna, before the Shabbos was given, Bashteit in Agilui Einig Elyon Yoser. So this is a revelation of a much deeper level of the pleasure of Hashem, Kanal, as explained before. Und the far, so therefore, now we understand why the schar for Yosef keeping Shabbos and revealing and connecting to such a high level of the Hashem's pleasure is dafke over here in this, that the karbonis are brought in Shabbos. Is the schar of the shvise or shmira bedarges Shabbos shaloi nitna, keeping Shabbos on such a high level, which is higher than any level that where the Shabbos was given to in any lower world, gekommen in an ian hafchi von der aliyah b'Shabbos v'ruchnius Shabbos shebaretz ba nitna. It is expressed in something which is opposite of the way Shabbos is applied and the way the spirituality of Shabbos is applied in lower worlds. Why is that? Al derech v'mizan. This is something that we can see as an einig, yoser elyon, when you have a very, very deep pleasure that cannot be defined or expressed in any way. Nizgala lefa'amim, at times it's where is it expressed and in what is it revealed? Dafke in anim versus tachten yoser. It's revealed in something which is very simple and very low, very tachten yoser. And the Rabbi brings an example for this in Order 65, the vision of a person. When you see something, you see it physically, and it touches you very deeply. When you hear something, you don't see it, you're just hearing the concept spiritually, but it doesn't touch you so deeply. So too, when a person has a level of pleasure in something which is expressed and is revealed, and you get into the ruach of it, into the spirituality of it, so it's expressed on a certain level, in a certain spiritual experience. But when it touches your very core and it's so deep, it can't be expressed or defined or limited in any experience, in any spiritual experience. It comes down in something very low and very physical that connects the very essence of the person, that expresses the very essence of the person. So the expression of the schar, of the einig of Shabbos that Yosef kept, is dafke in bringing karbanis on Shabbos. Actually doing the maisa of bringing karbanis, which is usually the opposite of Shmira Shabbos. Another example that Rabbi brings, Valderech by Ha'av u'benoi, like you see in the relationship of a father and his son, as dafke in a maisa katnas from benoi atinik. It's a very small petty thing that a child does, is do ha'hecher einig. The father gets a pleasure of seeing a cute thing that a child does, and it expresses the essence of the child, is that very deep connection that the father has to the child, even more mer wie von dem seichel from Bnei Gadol, more than if his son was learning and was expressing an opinion on a matter which the father could value and appreciate, but that doesn't have that cuteness and that very deep connection that is expressed between the father and the son. So too over here regarding keeping Shabbos, there is the expression of Shabbos with the holiness of Shabbos and the usual ruchnius of Shabbos, but then there's the essence of Shabbos that Yosef kept, that's expressed in dafke in the lowest, which is the action of bringing the karbanis on Shabbos. The Rabbi concludes this inyan, connecting it now in Osid Aleph dafke to Shevet Yosef, and also giving us here an additional appreciation for why the schar is dafke by bringing the karbanis on Shabbos. Al Pikol Anal, based on all this, that Neuch verstehen die Sheiches von der Minion zu Yosef ve Ephraim dafke. Why was Yosef and Ephraim dafke the one that is bringing the carbon on Shabbos? The reason for Yosef is, what does Yosef represent? As the pasuk says, Yosef Hashem li bein acher. That when he was born, his mother said, Hashem should give me another son. But what does this mean? So one of the famous pshatim that the Rebbe would always quote from the Tzemach Tzedek is, as macht von acher aben. His aveda in this world is to take one that seems to be an other, an outsider, and brings him in and reveals the fact that he's really a son. And this is expressed even more and especially in his son with the name Ephraim, which is al Shem ki Hefrani Elikim be'eretz anyi. That Hashem, that the meaning of the name is that he multiplies, or he's fruitful in this land of affliction, which means Sein Inyan is, what does he represent? Was dafke in Eretz Ani, in a land of affliction, Vert Hefrani Elikim. The affliction itself reveals and expresses how you can become fruitful here. It's hapche chasheichel and transforming the darkness in itself into sweet, or the darkness into light, and the bitterness into sweetness. On the river. So therefore, coming back now to the carbon, the schar for keeping Shabbos is dafke by bringing a carbon on Shabbos. So therefore, is dafke by in given that in von akravas a carbon b'Shabbos. The schar here is that it's Yosef and Ephraim that brings the carbon of Shabbos. As von aniyin shel akrave, was by Yom Shabbos is das l'chayra aniyin von ani, bringing the carbon of Shabbos. On Shabbos, this could be defined as an affliction. It's a chil Shabbos usually. Vert fakert, it now becomes the opposite. Hefrani, fruitful. At toisvis in shmiras the kedushas Shabbos. It's adding in keeping and the holiness of Shabbos. Shabbos itself demands that this carbon should be brought in Shabbos. So this itself expresses an ishapche in the kedusha of Shabbos, and therefore this is the appropriate schar for Yosef and Ephraim, that their entire inyan is representing this hapche chasheiche l'nahira.